Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to be checking out a video titled Why Europe Isn't Ready for a Second Trump Term. Election is tomorrow. You guys are going to see this on election day. I'm releasing this on election day. I rarely do that where I make a video and I release it the next day, but I'll be doing that now. So thank you for watching this video. Any recommendations, leave those in the comment section down below. And let me know who's your pick for the election, even though I think most people who are choosing are just choosing based off of one issue and not really rationalizing the entire situation. That's the unfortunate situation about politics. And that's what makes me really distance myself away from it, because we kind of nitpick. So if my issue is, people being obese, I'm like, this party is going to get us in a better place because of obesity, but I'm not looking at all the other things that party is going to be doing, in a disruptive manner. And I'm not really learning how they're going to be controlling the obesity. So I think that's the biggest issue with politics. And we're going to be just checking out this video right now and see why Europe doesn't want another Trump term. I think I might have my ideas already, which a lot of Europeans probably don't even know about. But I think this might be headed towards NATO, because when he was here before, that was a big thing. And a lot of Europeans probably didn't know that, but it was. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Let's go into this video.
During Donald Trump's term as U.S. president, he complained a lot about this chart. It shows that America's allies in NATO were spending less than 2% of their GDP on their militaries. That frustrated Trump, because back in 2014, every NATO member agreed to reach that target by 2024. Yet 3 years later, most weren't even close. So Trump began threatening to pull the U.S. out of NATO.
This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. NATO members must finally contribute.
Trump's threats and Russia's invasion of Ukraine convinced more members to reach the target. But as he runs for a second term, people that used to work for him believe he'll really withdraw from NATO this time, while people who will likely work with him are making plans for how to do it, all while Trump drops pretty strong hints himself.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
It means that in a second Trump term,
I don't like that statement, though. I do not like that statement. And I heard the crowd go crazy for that. You do not say that. You're promoting war. Like, I get the standpoint, hey, you're not going to use me. Hey, you don't pay, I'm not going to help you. But for crying out loud, don't encourage it. God, man, politicians these days have just lost me. They lost me because they don't know how to get out there and just speak the truth without being rude or just trying to be a show. Like, the United States politics is literally a show right now. Everybody's just dissing each other. Oh, yeah, look at him, look at him, look at her, look at her. It's like a comedy show now. Everybody just dissing each other. That's not politics. That's not how we move forward, right? We're focused on the most ridiculous things these days in politics. It's kind of disappointing, you know what I mean? Because politics was never like this. It was something that, people looked at it and you could see a difference between a politician and just a normal person, because the insults would never be out of a politician's mouth, and even if they do insult you, it would be in such a way that you can't really figure it out that it's an insult, but these days it's just too chaotic. I don't know. I don't like it.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
It means that in a second Trump term, the U.S. may finally leave Europe alone to defend itself. And that is causing some panic.
Most European leaders really would not like to see his return.
We know from the first Trump administration that things can happen unexpectedly. This is a real possibility.
So how much does Europe's security really depend on the United States? And can Europe survive if it leaves?
Fight or flight.
After World War II, the U.S. was tired of fighting in Europe.
Twice in the last 40 years, our country has thrown its full economic and military power into a deadly struggle to prevent the triumph of a dangerous aggressor in Western Europe.
But it was worried that it would have to again. The Soviet Union had seized control of Eastern Europe and was threatening to take over the West too. These countries had ruined economies, little trust for each other, and their tired militaries were no match for the Soviets. But instead of leaving a vulnerable Europe to fend for itself, the US decides to help protect it, at least until it could defend itself. It gives these countries $13 billion to rebuild and encourages them to trade together. Then the US joins them in a military alliance, NATO, where every member pledges to help in the event that one of them is attacked, meaning the Soviets would need to be willing to take on all these countries, plus the US. To prove it was serious, the US bases some of its own troops, weapons, and even nuclear bombs inside European countries.
More than 1 million men have been added to the armed forces of the European members through NATO. The communists have not gained an inch of territory in Europe since the treaty was signed.
Defending Europe was expensive, but it did have its benefits. The US economy boomed thanks to exporting materials to Europe. Over the next few decades, European countries recover and NATO expands, but the US doesn't leave.
There were tensions from the war about the idea of Germany rearming. States wanted to do different things. They would all still be building in a lot of debt. And so the US kind of ends up staying in order to smooth all of that over.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 gives the US another chance to step back. No country was threatening to take over Western European countries, and most of them had grown rich, to invite more countries into NATO, thereby extending its protection to more of Europe.
Bill Clinton in the 1990s really wanted to appeal to voters of Eastern European origin in swing states. And the idea that if the US were to pull back from Europe, maybe the Europeans would go their own way, and that was something we didn't want.
Despite the new members, the US does reduce the number of troops it has in Europe. The problem was, so did Europe. They dramatically cut defense spending, largely in service of expanding social programs.
That the European states in the 1990s basically take a much larger peace dividend.
I mean, the reality is the social programs are literally Europe's identity. If there's one thing I've known and learned since my time learning about Europe, it's a social program. It's very important. So understandable, but military is important when you have history of such.
To the point today where I would say that relationship is extremely unbalanced.
This imbalance is at the heart of Trump's argument against NATO. And this election cycle, he's including the war in Ukraine in that, arguing the U.S. should send less military aid and push Russia and Ukraine to negotiate an end to the war.
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance.
Trump likes to point to this chart as evidence that the U.S. is doing more than its fair share, but tends to misinterpret it in a few ways.
Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined.
First, this isn't money the U.S. is paying NATO. It's what the U.S. spends on its own military, which is a lot higher than Europe because, well, the U.S. military is a lot bigger. He also misunderstands what these gaps are.
And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years.
This isn't money that countries owe the U.S., but money they promised to spend on their own militaries. And in the last few years, many have made that up. But while Trump's wrong about some of these specifics, he's correct that the U.S. still contributes a significant amount to Europe's defense.
So this was another one of those fact checks where you end up with, multiple Pinocchios, but you're not really getting at the meat of the issue. If you look at the actual forces that are in place in Europe, the US is still by far the biggest contributor.
Today, the US has 100,000 troops in Europe, more than most European armies. Most countries have some advanced weapons, but the US provides a lot, including some key things like long-range missiles, heavy lift and refueling aircraft, and intelligence technology. And while the UK and France have nuclear weapons, it's still US nukes that serve as the ultimate deterrence, shielding NATO from an attack. In other words, the US is still the glue that holds together Europe's defense.
If the US were to just vanish tomorrow, European states, very wealthy, industrially advanced, etc., but they couldn't immediately fill those roles. There is not, I would say, a single European military that could do everything that the US can do.
These capabilities are why the US took the lead when Russia ignited another war in Europe. Since 2022, the U.S. has sent more military aid to Ukraine than all the countries in the European Union combined. Many weapons that Europe pledged to donate were found to be defective, old, and broken, revealing just how weak Europe had let its militaries become. Even though helping Ukraine is in the US's interest, Trump is still viewing it in terms of money spent and money owed.
We're in for 250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done. They should be forced to equalize.
This was a dangerous misunderstanding.
Alliances are not just about money. Most American presidents going back to the 1950s would say that a stable and secure Europe is a vital American national interest. I don't think Mr. Trump understands that.
Trump is far from the first US president to feel frustrated that Europe is...
It's a reality, though I'm not justifying Europe not having a strong impact with NATO. The reality is, let's say, there was a USSR and they just took over Western Europe. What do you think would happen? And then it would be you versus you, and then you're screwed. Right? No offense to Europeans, but Europe is like a defense for the United States, right? It's simply put, it's that simple, right? So protecting your defense is something that can easily help you. And that's just the nature of it, because the threat is not Germany to the United States. What happened with the World War II, World War I, it was inside of Europe mainly, right? Other places came here to do what they needed to do. World War II to be specific, right? So at the end of the day, the problem is here. But if the problem spreads, the problem now goes somewhere else. So if you can keep that problem on the down low where it's originally at, then you should be in a much better situation, in my humble opinion.
In 2023, U.S. Congress passed a bill barring the president from withdrawing from NATO without its approval. But Trump can leave NATO without officially leaving NATO. And some of the people that may work with him are working out plans on how to do just that. One Trump ally suggested that NATO adopt a new policy where members who spend more than 2% aren't obligated to help members who don't. This would almost certainly violate the original NATO treaty. Another plan calls for Trump to pull U.S. troops out of Eastern Europe and leave only some naval and air power to create a so-called dormant NATO that the U.S. only gets involved with in an emergency. And in Project 2025, conservative analysts and former Trump officials argue that Trump should transform NATO so that Europe only relies on the U.S. for its nukes and a select number of other capabilities.
It's either going to be some sort of pay for protection deal, or it's going to be some level of US pullback. I don't really see much in between those two options for Trump.
Trump hasn't endorsed any of these plans, but European leaders are still nervous that if he does win and pulls the US back, it'll leave them dangerously unprepared. Without US troops, European NATO members don't...
See, I think this is a good topic to be on, because the European military, or the European countries, their military needs to be more amplified. However, I think a balanced playfield, whatever, a balanced, spectrum or area is simply Europeans having a strong military. They have their own alliance. However, NATO, the United States can aid these European countries, right? Same thing that is happening with Ukraine. America is not in Ukraine fighting the war, but the aid is helping Ukraine drastically in a very severe way, or, serious way, whatever word I should use instead, right? So I don't think it needs to be presently there, doing all the things, but I think the equipments need to be available, but the pay to win thing, nah, dude, that is not it, because that's going to put Europe indebted, bro.
Have enough to defend themselves against an invasion from a full-size Russian army. While they have 1.9 million soldiers combined, a recent analysis found that they would struggle to get more than 300,000 ready to fight.
Damn.
And in the past few years, many European militaries have shrunk because they can't find enough recruits. Europe would also have trouble replacing the aircraft, long-range weapons, and intelligence technology that only the US makes. And without US nuclear weapons, other countries may feel compelled to build their own.
If those go away, Britain and France are nuclear powers, but would Germany need nuclear weapons? So I think the absence of the American nuclear deterrent from Europe's defense would lead to some very difficult questions that would take some time to sort out among Europeans.
It doesn't seem ready to make the hard political decisions yet either. Governments are already struggling to choose between spending more on defense or protecting their very popular social programs. And they still don't agree on how to defend themselves. While many Eastern countries believe Russia is the most serious threat, Southern countries tend to be more concerned with controlling migration. The fact is, Europe needs more time to figure this out, and Trump may not give it to them.
When they need time, but it's like turning a supertanker. The worst thing could be if Trump says, Europe is a rich, they can do it on their own, we're getting out, it's up to them.
Trump threatened to abandon NATO. He encouraged Putin to invade our allies. We understand the importance of the greatest...
Yeah, that statement that he made earlier was so shit. Like, I hate when someone says something that makes sense and then screws it all the way up with a very, very questionable statement at the end. And that's exactly what he did. He encouraged an invasion. He encouraged it. I would say they should do it. That was his words, right? And the way how I go about life is I don't defend people's words. If you say something, you said it. I'm not going to defend that shit for you, right? And that's just how it is. And at this point, I really don't even know where politics is headed towards, man, because it makes no sense.
The alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO.
Trump's opponent, Kamala Harris, has suggested that she'll stick to the status quo.
I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies.
But there is reason to think that keeping the status quo would also be a mistake.
Yeah.
Because there's a chance Europe may suddenly have to defend itself, even if
And they're
Harris is
not
president.
ready.
Over the last few decades, China's built a powerful military and is threatening to start a war, possibly with Taiwan, a U.S. ally. The U.S. has been steadily moving more of its military there to deter it, but if China were to suddenly attack, the U.S. would have to shift much of what it has in Europe there too, which is why it's important to keep pushing Europe to prepare.
There's going to have to be an impetus that creates this change. We do not want a Biden administration style approach where we, reassure Europeans that the US is always going to be there, even if there's a crisis in Asia or the Middle East.
And is confident they can do it if given enough time.
If we're talking 5 to 15 years, and we're not talking 1 year, I think Europeans could fill most of the gap.
A few European leaders have taken the lead. The Baltic states, who border Russia, have long urged NATO members to boost their defense spending. Poland wants to raise the target to 3% of GDP, and French President Emmanuel Macron has even suggested forming a European army, or at least a more muscular Europe. But it's past time for the rest of Europe to join them. And the US, by contributing so much to their defense, should use this leverage to push them to, not suddenly pull it away.
Yeah.
I think that
I
a more
agree.
equal US-European defense relationship would be a very good thing. And I would prefer to see it happen in a reasonable,
Time frame.
phased approach that
5 to
doesn't
10.
leave everybody worse off.
Yes.
All right, that's our episode.
Absolutely. My 2 cents. I don't think Europe should be so dependent on the United States with this whole NATO situation. NATO is beautiful, but at the end of the day, I think NATO is more beneficial to the United States than it is beneficial to Europe, right? You guys are on the front of the battlefield, right? I've seen so many videos about other European countries, for example, Poland and Finland, 2 countries that I do know the history of pretty decently at the moment. Poland, right? But Finland, I know a lot more, right? Invasions, and there was little to no help from anyone, right? You can't really count on anyone to be your hero. So the best thing you can do is be the hero yourself. So I do believe a stronger military is definitely needed for Europe. What I think the NATO agreement and contract should be is that it's an aid. Right, so we're supplying you with these aids so you can help yourself. If it's a situation where you're losing so terribly and you need, that dramatic assistance, then we can swoop right in and just help you out. You know what I mean? I think that's what it should be, because if it's not like that, then the European military is just going to be dependent on America to just fight their battles, and I don't think that's a good thing because the United States is all the way over there. Like, if the United States backs out, that's it. You know what I mean? So thinking about on the aspect from the European side, I think it's better for Europe to have a stronger military and to be less dependent on NATO and the United States. That's what I think. You guys can let me know what y'all think in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.